Before I introduce our speakers, may I kindly request that you all come in and then take a seat? And once again, there's plenty of seats in the middle. The people to my right, feel free to come to the center. Feel free to come to the center. Thank you. So we will proceed with the next item on the agenda. In this plenary session, we'll be looking at feeding the world, preserving the world from a scientific and technological point of view. Most of our African countries, or most of the continent, relies heavily on agriculture as a backbone of their economies. The following panelist and moderator will be discussing ways in which we can look at food security from a different angle. To direct this panel, I will call upon the moderator, Professor Adam Snayed from the University of Guelph, to come forward and moderate the session and also introduce the panelists. Professor, you're welcome.
Good morning. We're here today to discuss one of the greatest areas of scientific innovation on the continent, and I'm so happy to be here to discuss with such a high-level panel, and I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity to moderate this panel today to the next Einstein Forum organizers. Today, we're on the cusp of scientific innovations related to food security and sustainable agricultural development. Climate-smart agriculture is an incredible area of innovation and scientific research. We're talking about interdisciplinary collaborations to advance science for Africa's agricultural transformation. We're talking about feeding people in ways that are more sustainable. We're talking about foods and dietary transitions towards climate-smart foods. And we need to talk a little bit about the technical, social, political, and institutional environment that can enable African food systems to become more climate smart. More sustainable agriculture faces barriers. There are lots of sciences. Just think about your breakfast this morning. How many different approaches to agricultural science contributed to each ingredient that you consumed? Now think about this for 1 second, the science that actually contributed to your food. There are more disciplines now than there were in the 20th century. We have 20th century disciplines related to food science and agricultural science, and now there are new disciplines emerging, like agroecology, a different approach to science for agriculture and sustainability. So let me introduce our panelists. Today, we are very blessed to have Dr. Ousmane Badiane, the Africa Director for the International Food Policy Research Institute, or IFPRI, with us today. Dr. Badiane, please come up and have a seat. Dr. Sanushka Naidu, a NEF Fellow who we met yesterday, is a Senior Lecturer in the Department of Genetics at the University of Pretoria. Chef Pierre Chiem, the celebrated chef and co-founder of Yolele Foods and advocate for foods from Africa. And yes. Okay, she's here. Dr. Agnes Kalibata has just joined us. She is the president for the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. And finally, Dr. Simeon Ehui, the director of the Food and Agriculture Global Practice at the World Bank. So just a quick and brief introduction related to format. We're going to start the session today with a presentation from Chef Pierre, and then we're going to start a question and answer period with the panelists, hopefully culminating in a discussion where I don't have to say a lot and where they can interact with each other. And then we're going to invite participation from the audience because we know that we have an incredible wealth of scientific knowledge in this room today. So Chef Pierre, would you please come up and show us what's happening?
Good morning. What is the chef doing here at the scientific conference? Well, I'm here to talk about an ancient grain called Fonio. An ancient grain, as you can read, is good for you, great for the planet, and even better for farmers. The challenge. Fonio is a grain that grows in the Sahel region of Africa. The Sahel is one of the hardest growing food region in the whole world. It has 135 million people, and there's infrequent water supply and extreme heat. You can see in the screen that the Sahel is going throughout, right south of the Sahara Desert from the Senegal region all the way to Eritrea. And by 2050, this population is set to double. What if I told you that under the Sahel's dry topsoil lies a tiny miracle? This ancient grain that we call fonio, and that's been cultivated for more than 5,000 years. Fonio today grows in all these countries that you see: Benin, Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Ghana, Guinea, Ivory Coast, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, Senegal, Gambia, and Togo. But only a tiny group of these countries are really consuming fonio in a regular basis. If you ask people from Senegal, for instance, most of them don't know what fonio is unless they go to the southeast region, the poorest region of Senegal, in Tambacounda and some parts of Casamance. And why is that? Fonio only takes 2 months to grow. It's the first crop to mature after the rainy season. They call it the hungry season crop, because it comes when the other crops are gone. It's drought resistant. It has deep, extensive roots, allowing it to thrive in dry regions like the Sahel. It's a major boon for farmers challenged by climate change. Many smallholder fonio farms provide employment opportunities for women. It's healthy. It's gluten-free. It has 3 times more protein than brown rice, has more iron, more fiber. It's rich in amino acids, 2 amino acids in particular, methionine and cysteine, and those amino acids are rare in all the other major grains: rice, barley, you name it, wheat. It has a low glycemic index. That means that it's great, it's recommended for people with diabetes. It cooks in 5 minutes, which is also a great thing. As a chef, this is what really attracted me to fonio. So I started a company in the United States, where I'm based. I'm from Senegal. I'm based in New York. We started a company called Yolele Foods. And we decided to introduce fonio to the US and to the other parts of the world, because right now consumers are more conscious of what they are eating, and they are looking for grains that are gluten-free. That's a whole trend right now. They are looking for ancient grains. They are looking for nutritious grains. So the challenge was to introduce fonio to this part of the world, and at the same time, make sure the smallholder communities that produce fonio benefit from it. Yolele partnered with some of the world's largest food retailers, food markets, whole food markets, Amazon, Thrive Market, to name a few. And today we are selling through, sorry, I came too early to this one, but today we are selling to all through these networks to the US, and we hope to even bring back fonio to the cities like Dakar and Abidjan, for instance, where you can easily see baguette breads and croissants made out of wheat, and we don't grow those products, and they're even less nutritious than fonio. I'm showing these different food pictures to show you how versatile fonio is. We've been able to make pastas with fonio. We hope to make nutrition bars with fonio, snacks with fonio. This here you can see jollof croquettes with fonio, mango salad with fonio, mafe, of course, the original way of preparing fonio with that peanut sauce in West Africa. Fonio sushi, Japanese could have fonio too. That's the vision. So Yolele is working to improve the quality of fonio processing with plans to build the world's first industrial-scale fonio mill. The mill will buy at fair trade market price from smallholder farmers, bringing employment to the region. And we hope that this mill will be open by late 2019. We are right now in the process of organizing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chef Pierre. This is a fascinating development. And Chef Pierre, more broadly though, beyond Fonio, what are Africans in terms of climate smart diets? Do you see changes in diets with in Senegal or beyond? How are people eating climate smart foods?
Well, there's lots of education that needs to be done still. I mean, again, like I was saying, in cities like Dakar, people are still thinking that what comes from the West is best, and we're still importing our food, which is unfortunate. So education needs to be done not only by chefs, it has to be policies behind it. Governments have to get involved, and entrepreneurs have to get involved promoting these local products that are fantastic and that are great for climate change adapted. Fonio is drought resistant. And that's what we need right now, these kind of crops.
You mentioned the kind of intersection or the interdisciplinarity, and this is really, I think, what this panel is trying to achieve with genetics and from your position, and also Dr. Ousmane Badiane from IFPRI, and just to continue along the lines of African innovations for food security and for climate smart agriculture. You have this portfolio of 54 countries, and you're looking at the continental scale. What do you see as the innovations that are driving climate smart diets and change?
Thank you, good morning to everyone. This is certainly a great innovation, which I like. I love Fonio, by the way, Chef Cham. Let me first say what we understand under sustainable agriculture, right? And then I'm going to talk about what the science and innovation systems are contributing. We want sustainability because we want to be producing more food with less resources that are used, meaning land, labor, water, pesticides, energy, chemicals. If we achieve to do that, then we are going on a trajectory of sustainable food systems. That's what we would like to do. But we also would like to produce safer food, greater health for plants and for animals. This is part of the sustainability as well. And finally, we would like to reduce waste and contamination along the value chain as we process more food. It is that broader framework of sustainability that science and innovation systems in Africa have to contribute to, which is very important. But you also said sustainable agriculture and food security. That means that access to food by vulnerable people that meets their needs has to be coupled with the needs and requirements of a sustainable agriculture. Those are very important. That's where science and innovation have to bring its contribution. Now, it's hard to discuss the contribution of science and innovation in broad and abstract terms. So what I've chosen to do is to highlight specific achievements, scientific innovation achievements that go towards supporting agriculture and the food systems. Let me first start with West Africa, where scientists have been working on expanding the options to raise supply and fight pests while reducing the pressure on soil, which is important contribution to sustainability. We have the example that the group of researchers did in Cote d'Ivoire, which is now in a position to produce off-season banana, so that you don't just have to focus on a specific time period of the year to do that. They have introduced pest-resistant rainy season tomato. Anybody who does vegetable production knows how it is difficult in the rainy season. It's in Mali, and it's being used by farmers. They have homegrown vaccines against Newcastle disease in poultry, allowing people in Ghana to expand poultry production. They're working on post-harvest technologies to add value and increase food safety. There are machines now, manual machines for oil extraction that can be used to reduce aflatoxin in groundnuts. We all know what it does in terms of cancer and other things, which is, of course, improving the value to the farmers of their production. There are new millet varieties in Senegal that are now being used in Cote d'Ivoire that can produce flour of a quality that can be supplemented into wheat and reduce the import bills and provide better food for the farmers. That's examples of West Africa. I can go to the African level and talk about example of the African Agricultural Technology Foundations, for which I serve as chair of the board of trustees. I have to disclose that, but I do like what they do. That's why I've chosen this job to be there. They have developed significant varieties of maize, trigger resistance. Anybody who does maize know what trigger means. Obnoxious weeds that reduce everything that you have in terms of potential for production. They have a BT cowpea, yes, BT cowpea that is resistant to pod borer, allowing people to produce a very rich and healthy legume. I think Chef Cham will agree with me. They have pest resistance BT maize, which is unfortunately not just being used in South Africa, which I think has a huge potential across the continent. There's work on stress tolerance varieties, drought-tolerant maize. You see how climate change does. They have rice varieties that are water efficient, salt tolerant, and nutrient efficient that are coming to the market, as well as hybrid rice for the first time with parental lines from Africa. So there's a lot happening in the systems. But there's also work happening across Africa in terms of providing better data and supporting policymaking decisions for better targeting of interventions by policymakers. In particular, understanding where poverty is, where the vulnerable people are, so that we can have the social protection systems to link sustainable production and food security. So to conclude, African science innovation systems are indeed contributing greatly. We still have the question, though, whether it is at a scale to take us down the road of sustainable agriculture and food security today and in the future.
Okay, that's great. Barriers to entry for innovators in Africa. You've discussed multiple innovations here. What do you feel from your position are the biggest barriers to African scientists and African innovators having an impact?
There's a very short sentence: lack of critical mass. And I'll break that down a little bit. I've been working in this profession for the last 30-something years, and I've traveled across the continent. I've had partnership all over the continent. There are just too few resources in terms of expertise, laboratory, institutional infrastructure, and others. Let me give you a few numbers. The numbers of researchers in the ag system in Africa rose from 1,000 in 2000 to about 1,500 for a continent of how many millions of people, over 1 billion of people. Yes, we increased by 50%, but we're way below where we need to be. Second, most of those researchers are concentrated in 3 countries: Kenya, Ethiopia, and Nigeria, 50% of them. PhDs are about 27%, with the complexity of agriculture and where we're going in terms of research. Just not enough. More than half of the PhD holders in the systems are older than 50 to 60. We're talking about youth, we're talking about science, we're talking about technology. Here is an area where youth is scarce, and we need to invest quite a lot in there. Women make out 24%. There's no question that the need for engendering science and technology is even more acute than in terms of rejuvenating it. Let's talk about funding levels, which is also impeding critical mass and therefore the capacity to go to scale. Total spending for ag research and science and innovation went from 1.7 billion to 2.5 billion in 2011, way below what we need to do. And most of the funding concentrated again in Nigeria, Kenya, and Republic of South Africa, 50%. The growth rate is below 5% for most countries except 5 of funding going into these systems. And the spending share of agricultural GDP going into research innovation has decreased. That is just unacceptable, from 0.7 to 0.5 of agricultural GDP. That just is not going to give us the critical mass we need to go to scale. And more importantly, 60% of funding going to science and innovation in agriculture comes from external sources, which are highly volatile. So funding for research and innovation in Africa is twice as volatile than funding for research and innovation in other regions of the world. Those are main constraints to the individual researcher as well as to the systems to be able to go to scale. Despite all the efforts that are making, that's where we need the biggest changes: funding levels, and in terms of staffing and skill and expertise. Thank you.
That's great, thank you. So Dr. Naidu, we've been discussing innovations, and I just wanted to clarify that you were recently promoted to Associate Professor at the University of Pretoria from January 1st this year, so congratulations. Today, though, I want to ask you specifically about your experiences as an innovator, how governments and business have supported your development, and how you think that governments and businesses more generally can support lab-based innovations for food security and climate-smart agriculture in the African context.
Thank you. That's a great question. And I think I have been quite well supported. And I want to thank the National Research Foundation back in South Africa for an innovative program that required the partnering of industry, government, and academia. So this is the Technology and Human Resource for Industry program. And that has supported my research for the past few years. It's taken the basic research that I've done, and it's looked into ways of making that into products for industry. I have been also well supported because I work within forestry, and we have a good understanding in South Africa between forestry companies for the challenges that face forestry coming right now and into the future. So they have put quite a lot of resources into looking at pests and pathogens that exist in forestry and looking at tree defense mechanisms that one could use into the future. However, we still have a very long road to travel, and that's because we need to take this basic research and to convert that into something that's a tool so that we can use it in something like forest trees, which I consider a fiber crop, and take that knowledge that is a deep, rich knowledge because it has been well supported, and we can then translate that into other crops where we have inadequate knowledge. And in particular, I think that we need to be looking at these orphan crops because who will invest and who will know enough about the genetics of those crops so that when we rely on them in future, because we're going to have lots of challenges with climate change, will we know what to plant where at the right time? And this relies on bridging that chasm between the basic into translational research.
Okay, I want to follow up a little bit on your specific area. As a political scientist, I'm drawn to political conflict and the intersection of science and politics. And I know in particular, there have been lots of politics mapping onto your own research area, and you're not alone. I mean, many other innovators related to agricultural and food applications have this. So what is your experience with politics and these questions that map onto your research? How do you navigate this as a young African researcher?
So I think that we have been very cautious regarding some of these technologies, so specifically transgenic technology and looking at genetically modified organisms. And I think that we have some regulatory frameworks in place, but it would be fantastic if that was facilitated and that we could adopt technologies right now and have them staggered and ready to deploy when the time comes. If we're going to take 10, 15, 20 years to get to a product that's absolutely necessary regarding climate change, and there's so many examples of this. For example, the papaya that is primarily GM in Hawaii now, and it was saved because it was transgenic. And if you think about the American chestnut as an example, because of pathogens, there comes a time when these technologies are sort of the major tool that has to be used. And for that, I think we need to be talking more about adopting these technologies, adopting these tools, and also increase public awareness and understanding of what this technology entails, and not to be fearful of it, to understand how it can be adopted as a tool. Looking back, I think there was a study that was done in 2014 doing a meta-analysis of genetic modified foods and what the contribution has been over the years. And there's been a 37% decrease in the use of pesticides, a 22% increase in yield, and 68% increase in profit to farmers. These are really good reasons to think about GM technology as a tool going forward.
Right. That's great. And this actually brings in, I think, Dr. Kalibata, I should turn to you on this one, because we were talking about innovations, and from your position at the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, you're constantly thinking about the role of agricultural innovations, but I'm particularly interested in the roles that you see for local technologies and local content, and the application of local content to climate-smart agriculture.
Thank you. It's interesting that we are talking about local content here in Rwanda. This is a country that prides itself in building whatever it builds out of local content, whether it's programs in agriculture, whether it's programs in justice, whether it's programs, so many other things. We really, as a nation, build on what we know. Now, from an agricultural perspective, if you want to see where the future of, for example, Rwanda's agriculture is going, you can't fail to notice two things. The one cow per poor family program, which is the Girinka program, that really comes from how people treat the whole cow culture, and really building on that and designing programs. In a short while, this country is going to be having a white revolution like you saw in India, specifically shaped by how the Girinka program was designed, that really draws from the people's culture. So that's just looking at locally what is acceptable locally and how do you build on that. There are other things like land consolidation program, which this country also drove, and which very interestingly is a program that is being used by China for the same reasons and with different results. Rwanda used land consolidation program to really encourage communities to come up with some Rwandan typical green revolution, where you grow the same commodity, increase volumes, market viability of commodities, so that they could, from the small plots farmers own, so that they could have market viability. In China, exactly for the same, starting from the same point where smallholder farmers have small plots, they are designing an agricultural system that looks at consolidation, and they are designing apps that link people who have land to people who don't have land. They're designing large-scale farming based on small land holdings, and they're designing policies in the agricultural sector that define how agriculture gets done differently. So there's really room for local content. I just wanted to add one thing based on what we do as an institution in Agra. We drive technologies from a perspective of improved seeds. We would like farmers to have better access to seeds. We'd like them to have better access to fertilizers. And we do recognize that we have to build on what exists locally. We work on across 15 varieties. We work with local national institutions so that they can build and start with what they have locally. And from that, let me just give you an example of one young girl that has actually come up with a bean variety that cooks for 40 minutes as opposed to 4 hours. Just think about the amount of wood that saves the environment, but also think about what it does to the women and their time that they spend on cooking beans. So we do that for disease resistance, we do that for a number of other things. But I just wanted to give you one more example on local content when it comes to infrastructure. As an institution, we now fund what we call, in about 3 countries, we fund what we call Uber tractors. Why would Uber tractors be important? Because very few African farmers can afford to own tractors themselves. Because of that, the young people have come up with schemes where they are saying, you know what, I can set up a program where farmers can actually borrow tractors, but also tractor owners can track what tractors are doing, so that they actually get paid. Tractors are not being parked in places and they are not working, which is the major problem, in addition to the fact that most farmers wouldn't anyway be able to own a tractor. So you have a tractor service, you have your tractor actually working, and you are sitting in your office doing your work, you don't have to worry about that. So these type of things are all beginning to, technologies that are beginning to be built on the local situation and are influencing how agriculture gets done. I have a number of other examples, but those are enough for a start.
Well, I'll just follow right up on those examples, because there are so many, and this is the question then about aggregating all of these African innovations from rural areas in all African countries, and the clearinghouse of knowledge and the mobilization of knowledge about African technological innovations related to agriculture. Like, what can be developed in that area? How can development partners help you in your role to better disseminate and scale up the application of these innovations?
So one of the programs we have very intentionally put in place as AGRA is a program called Partnerships. Partnerships recognizes that we have a multiplicity of institutions, especially in the African landscape, all of them doing different things, all sometimes doing exactly the same thing with exactly the same people. And sometimes we don't know what each one is doing. So from a partnerships perspective, we hope to start working, very intentionally working with each other so that our resources can count more, but also we can share knowledge better. That's number one. Number two is we also put in place, as AGRA, we have the largest forum for the continent, the African Green Revolution Forum. In fact, this year, it is in Kigali on the 3rd to 7th of September. It's coming home to Kigali. This forum brings over 2,000 people in agriculture in one room, from private sector, from public sector, from youth to old people, to everybody, to really come and talk and discuss the knowledge we are seeing in agriculture. We also encourage other people. For example, the World Bank has a side event, a whole day side event on irrigation, so that they can bring all the knowledge in the world on irrigation together and be able to share. IDRC has a whole day event on research. We as AGRA publish what we call African Agricultural Status Report. Usman is one of the key people that contribute to this report. And this really gathers knowledge from across the continent so that we can get to be on the cutting edge of what's happening in the agricultural sector on the continent. So there are a number of ways, but I think for me the bottom line is if we started talking to each other, because sometimes we find exactly the same things for the same results. If we started talking to each other, building partnerships within the agricultural sector in Africa, there's an opportunity to go further than where we are going currently.
Thank you. Okay, maybe Dr. Hui, let's get you in on this a little bit from your position at the World Bank. We know the macro barriers and structural challenges that African food markets face, and now we have this new challenge that's mapped on, the climate challenge. And what are the latest models telling us from your perspective? What do we need to know more about?
Okay, thank you very much. And let me seize the opportunity of my presence here to thank the organizers for inviting me to this panel. It's my first time to attend the NEF, and I don't think that I'll be missing the next ones, because I truly believe that the next Einstein will really be an African. I've not met Dr. Travel Youssef, but I believe this is him sitting there from the picture. So it's really exciting, for me to be here. Now, you asked me a question about models and in the area for climate and beyond what World Bank has been doing on macro side. Yes, we do indeed work with the universities and other researchers on modeling for climate change. Now, the most available data that we have on modeling is from the IPCC, okay, which is indicating really that Africa will be really the region that will be most affected by the impact of climate change. Now, why is that important? We're talking about a region where the global food demand will increase significantly by 155% between now and 2050. This is really huge. We're talking about a continent where by 2030, we're going to have a food market with $1 trillion. We're talking about a continent where the import bill is about 35 billion now, and which will increase to 110 billion in 15 years' time. The question is, Africa will need to rise to be able to meet this challenge. How is it going to happen? It's through production. Unfortunately, if we don't address the issue of climate change now, there will be no way by which we'll be able to meet this challenge. Now, what the model is saying is that the worst case scenario, we're going to get yield decline between 27 and 32%, okay, of cereal crops, maize, groundnuts, sorghum, millet, okay, especially in the Sahel region that we just heard about, that's being hit seriously by the climate change. This is going to be very serious. There are other models that are coming up called global circulation model that are also indicating that yield can go as much down as 50%. And that's a big risk. We need to be able to do something about it. There are other impacts that's happening that are not modeled that we need to pay attention to. The issues of, let's say, the pests and diseases, for example, that are emerging as a result of climate change. Okay, and the pests and diseases are actually impacting on yield. We're talking about yield losses about 1/6 of yield that have been lost due to that. This is a problem. We also need to look at how the livestock sector is impacted on. For example, in Africa, the livestock is really dependent on the natural resources, the forages, the pasture, and these are also impacted upon by the climate change. This is also a factor to take into account. If we want to avoid the risks and conflict that we see, in Africa today as a result of movement of livestock from one area to another, imagine the case of what we see in Benue State, for example, where people are killing each other. It is a result of the fight for basic natural resources between the animals and the human beings. And we cannot ignore the impact of climate there. Okay? So these are some of the information that we have, and we need to be able to really respond to in a more systematic way, and be very diligent about it.
Okay, so at the World Bank then, there's a recalibration going on
Right.
in terms of the funding of climate smart initiatives. So could you maybe tell us a little bit more about how the World Bank is reorienting its approach to agriculture in light of the challenge?
Thank you. So since 2011, when the World Bank has really started to increase its working on a climate investment plan, we have significantly increased our support to countries to the tune of $1 billion as of last year, all focused on climate smart agriculture. We have something called an African Climate Business Plan, which is worth 19 billion, that to be reached by 2020. And in that you have also the climate smart agriculture, which is part of it. And we are working with our client to try to do that. I'm pleased to say that we have supported a lot of climate investment plans in countries. For example, I can tell you a case of Niger, where we have had one of the first climate smart agriculture projects that we have supported in Africa, okay, of $111 million, and today reaching some 114,000 farmers, to adopting drought-tolerant seeds, and working with the research like CGIAR system, ICRISAT, and so on in Kenya. We're doing the same. In Zambia, for example, we're also working along this line. So we are really investing a lot. We have a goal to be able to have to reach about 3 million hectares of land that are climate smart. That are utilizing climate smart practices, and also want to be able to reach some 25 million farmers between now and 2020. So the agenda is huge, and we're working with different countries on this agenda.
Excellent. We've been able to hear from everybody on this incredibly important topic. And before we open this up to the floor to questions, and I'll give everybody a couple minutes to think of some questions for our amazing panelists here today, I would like to hear 30-second answers from each of you on one core question in this area. What are the threats to a climate smart future for agriculture? What are the threats that you see? And I know it's only 30 seconds, but we have a very limited amount of time today. So the threats that you see, the principal threats, and how we might be able to best them, if you can get that out there as quickly as possible, maybe it'll be a minute each. And we'll start with Dr. Badian.
Thank you very much. The threats are clear and known. It's changes in the production conditions, unpredictability, volatility, temperature changes, and what have you. There's only one answer to that. Is the mastery and use of science and technology to deploy it to deal with nature. That's what humankind has been doing for centuries and millennia. It's going to be the same thing. It's not going to be different.
I think the major threat is not integrating and not sharing the knowledge, because if we are all trying to reinvent the wheel, we will never get it to our goal of climate smart agriculture.
One of the major threats for me is the disappearance of the biodiversity. Some of the crops that I used to see growing up in Senegal that are no longer around, and this is due to climate change.
I would say that for me the major threat would be lack of inaction coming from probably prolonged or inability of our leaders to take action at the right time, in the right place. Yesterday I was on one of the airlines and I used to hear that on Rwanda, but this time I was going to Kenya and they were saying, oh, by the way, if you have plastic bags, you need to remove your stuff from and leave them in the airplane. It's good to see countries taking action on things that impact the environment. If many more countries put up climate-smart action plans, then we will be able to deal with what is coming on, because definitely it's coming on, but the leadership is needed for this to be the case.
Now, for me, the biggest threat is really the misallocation of government resources to address the climate-smart issues. So you have countries that are actually spending a lot of resources on agriculture, but are targeting the wrong type of investment to do. So the issues of subsidies that are wrongly targeted, and don't get me wrong, subsidies are important and we must do them to be able to move up. But what kind of support the subsidies will actually support is important. So if resources can actually be allocated efficiently to address climate smart issues, public investments into research, education, to be able to support research in this area, we will not be able to address the issues significantly. So that's, for me, the biggest threat.
The hard challenges, and of course we need to be thinking about solutions. As the biggest employment generator still in the context of Africa, still the biggest source of economic growth across Africa, the sector, and possibly then the biggest source for scientific innovation and employment of scientists could be this area. And as we think more about what we want to ask the panelists, let's say maybe 3 questions from the plenary floor. And I have one hand here. We're going to take 3 and then open it up to everybody to answer. And then I believe we're going to have to wrap quickly. So maybe over there on the far right.
That's the lady.
Yes, yeah, you've got it.
Oh, thank you very much. As you may actually see on television every year, there is a drought, famine in Somalia, East Africa. Sadly, people in Somalia don't like to eat food that is being produced in Somalia. They like to eat pasta, spaghetti, and rice that is imported into Somalia. What will be the take-home message so I can help my people back home in Somalia? What will be the solution?
Thank you. Question right there in the middle.
Thank you. I'm Jean Bosco Gahutu from the University of Rwanda, College of Medicine and Health Sciences. My question goes to Pierre Thiam. What is the yield of the Fonio? I put that question because if the yield is limited, then there is possibility of crossbreeding with another cereal that has maybe lower nutrient value, and the result would be a crop with high nutrient value and available for the whole world.
Thank you. One further question over here on the left.
Excusez-moi, je suis Dr Demba Fabambaye, je suis du Sénégal. Je travaille pour un projet de l'USAID qui s'appelle USAID ERA, Éducation et Recherche en Agriculture. C'est un projet d'initiative Feed the Future et qui travaille avec l'ensemble des universités, des écoles de formation et aussi les producteurs, les transformateurs pour essayer de renforcer l'agriculture au niveau du Sénégal. Grosso modo, si je résume, parce que j'ai des brochures qui sont en anglais, c'est pourquoi j'ai préféré parler en français pour que Les gens en profitent, mais les brochures en anglais pour montrer tout ce qu'on a eu à faire à la démarche. Les leçons learning qu'on peut dire par rapport à ce projet, c'est ce que disait tout de suite Madame qui est de Agra. C'est en Afrique, on a beaucoup d'expertise dans le domaine agricole, mais les gens travaillent de façon isolée. En mettant les gens ensemble, on arrive à faire beaucoup de choses. Donc, dans notre projet, ça a été notre démarche. C'est d'abord de faire descendre les gens de l'université pour qu'ils aillent vers les producteurs et travailler aussi avec le secteur privé.
Okay, thank you.
Voilà.
Thank you for your
Donc,
question.
je voulais dire tout simplement comme question, surtout par rapport à professeur Badian, c'est que quel est le...
I think we're going to have to stop it there with the first one. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry.
Je vais m'arrêter là.
We're pressed for time.
Merci.
We have 5 minutes left, and we have a minute each to respond to these questions and also to kind of summarize the solutions, the forward momentum with science, walking hand in hand with scientists from across the continent to advance climate-smart agriculture. And maybe we can start down at the end with Dr. Hui.
Oh, thank you very much. I mean, the first question is relevant. I think you can generalize that. What can we do? What are the solutions? First of all, I think enhancing capacity locally is very important for people, local organizations at an regional, national, and local level to recognize what the impact of climate is on their economies. That's one. The second is regional cooperation. It's quite important. Climate change does not have any border. There's no difference whether or not it hits Rwanda or DRC or another country. So the question is, regional cooperation is quite important. The other point is the issue of data. It's quite important. Lack of data, or insufficient, poor data can lead to wrong decisions. So we need to be able to work together. At the World Bank, for example, we are having a private-public partnership, and we have something called an Ag Observatory, and we can actually tell, several weeks, months ahead, what may happen to a particular country, as a result of, climate change, and try to prevent it. So these are some of the solutions that I can talk to. But essentially, it's a question of regional cooperation, local capacity building, education and training is quite important. Thank you.
Dr. Kalibata.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to speak to the question from Somalia. First of all, I wanted to say that what is happening is probably a result of so many things. The institution I work for, AGRA, works in a number of countries. We actually worked in Somalia, and we were working in Somalia, but had to go out because of what was happening in Somalia. So a lot of work that we could have done to ensure that Somalia has locally adopted varieties didn't happen. So I hope that as things normalize, many of us can go back to Somalia and make sure that that work is happening, but also support local Somalian institutions to grow. The second thing, and probably most important, is Somalia is not the only country that is importing so much food. We have a $40 billion worth of imports of things we can make on this continent. So I think, again, I always keep going back to leadership. I think, again, there's a real issue here around how we start working with people who have money to invest in our countries. We may not have the money and the capacity for now, and we will have it as we continue growing it. But for now, we need money and capacity, and that sometimes sits somewhere. It doesn't have to be exported to Africa. It can actually be made in Africa if we create the right conducive environments, and that way we will not export the jobs that we export every time we send a dollar out. So I just wanted to say that Ethiopia has reversed this with regards to spaghetti and macaroni. It's making its own now with varieties of spaghetti that are grown within Ethiopia, with varieties that they can use for making spaghetti from within Ethiopia. So it's not like these things are not doable, but the environment has to be conducive for the research to happen, for people to invest and all these things. So I would say that there's hope because there's already drought-tolerant varieties that are in different countries that Somalia can access to.
Thank you. Quickly, how's the yield of Fonio? Right now, Fonio is producing 600,000 tons per year in Africa. And Fonio is also nicknamed the lazy farmer's crop because farmers just throw the seeds on the ground, and that's all it is. We believe that yield can be doubled by just training farmers in better agricultural practices. Of course, crossbreeding that you're suggesting could be a solution, but also, again, training farmers and working with them, training them and equipping them could be a solution to double the Fonio production and feed the rest of ourselves and the rest of the world.
So in terms of solutions, I'd like to talk about my own field in plant genetics. And there I'm also very hopeful. And that's because we have these tools and we can now select resistant varieties. And we can do that using these molecular markers. And we can do genomic selection. So we can, based on the genome of individual plants, we can then determine whether it is well adapted and better suited to certain climates and make better matches in that way. The other technology that we are looking closely at is this CRISPR-Cas9 and how we can use gene editing to look at susceptibility in different plants and see if just by modifying something like this, we can bring about a resistant individual. So in my field, I think there's quite a lot of solutions that can also be contributed there.
Very good. Thank you. First, to the challenge of climate change and the solution to that, I think it's going to be science-based. There's really nothing much we can do. We have to invest in mastering the technology of tomorrow, in particular biotechnology. The discussion of do we take or don't we take GMO is extremely passive. I think the right question is, do we have the expertise and the laboratories to master biotechnology and deal with climate-smart agriculture? Otherwise, we are doomed. And I think it should be within the reach of every government to double the number of PhDs in the science system within the next 5 to 10 years. Why aren't we doing it? I think it's important. Lastly, to the Somalia questions, I'm from Senegal. And there were times it was very difficult for a lot of people to consume millet. They were using bread and other things instead of millet or rice. You cannot force people to eat what they don't like. You cannot close the markets to have them eat what's inside because it's going to be expensive. But we know from our research that the growing middle class, which may be eating the past and others, really would like to spend more money on more sophisticated traditional staples. The processed, packaged, and better quality traditional staples would sell. In Senegal today, because millet is processed into different types of meals, the consumption in the urban areas is surging again. So I think that pushing production of local staples, supporting processing, making more sophisticated, more appealing food to the urban classes, you could reverse that trend.
Great. Please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists today.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure finally.
Thank you, Professor Adam, for leading such a brilliant panel discussion. And thank you to all speakers. You may rejoin your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to share with you the following program. I will need your attention, please, because we'll be having 4 concurrent sessions. There will be 4 parallel sessions taking place. So if I could have your attention for you to know where to go, that would be great. So the first parallel session will take place in this very room, and the parallel session is titled Changing the Way We Learn, Building Scientific Culture